Welcome to the Heartbreak Chronicles, where every story is a raw reflection of life. Hit that subscribe button to stay tuned, give us a like to show your support, and share this episode with your friends. Don't forget to leave a comment and let us know what you think. Now, let's dive into today's story. I'm Mark, and this year I'm going to tell you a story of love, betrayal, and rebirth. This story began on a cold December night at my wife Kate's company Christmas party. That night, I stood in the corner of the noisy ballroom with a glass of barely touched whiskey in my hand. In the center of the dance floor, Kate is dancing with her boss, Jason. They danced with grace and fluidity as if they were made for each other. Jason is tall, handsome, and a former college baseball star. He wrapped his arm around Kate's waist and pulled her closer than etiquette allowed. Kate's honey blonde hair swayed gently to the music, and she tilted her head back to look at Jason with a gleam in her eyes that I had once known. I tried to tell myself that it was just normal coworker interaction, but deep inside, a voice kept reminding me that something wasn't right. I thought back to Kate's erratic behavior over the past few months. Since last Thanksgiving, Kate has become distant and aloof. Conversations between us became fewer and farther between, and even when we did talk, they often turned into arguments. She began to work overtime frequently, often coming home late at night. Whenever I asked her about her work, she always absent-mindedly coped with a few sentences and hurriedly ended the conversation. Our intimacy with each other is becoming less and less. I've tried to schedule date nights, but she's always finding excuses to put them off. I sent her flowers and gifts only to find them discarded haphazardly. I tried so hard to salvage our relationship, but felt like I was struggling alone. Watching Kate and Jason embracing each other on the dance floor, I suddenly realized that our marriage may have come to an end. The thought sent a wave of vertigo through me, and I put down my glass and walked quickly out of the ballroom, needing fresh air to clear my head. The next morning, as I was sorting through my laundry, a crumpled piece of paper fell out of Kate's jacket pocket. I was going to just throw it in the trash, but ghostly unfolded it to look at it. It was a traffic ticket with a date of March 5th and a time of 2:39 p.m. I stared at the ticket and suddenly remembered the day Kate told me she was going to pick up some secondhand clothes from her best friend Mary's house. I dug out my phone and found the text message logs from that day to compare. I checked Google Maps and realized that the violation site and Mary's house were on opposite ends of the city. The discovery made my heart sink. I scrutinized the photo on the ticket, and while I could only see Kate's profile in the driver's seat, there was clearly a man's shoulder and arm sitting on the passenger side. My mind raced, trying to find a rational explanation for all this. Maybe she just changed her plans on the fly? Maybe the man was just a coworker or a friend. But no matter how much I tried to convince myself of this, the doubt and uneasiness within me grew stronger. I decided I had to get to the bottom of it. I picked up my cell phone and dialed Miller, my longtime friend and attorney. "Miller, it's me, Mark." My voice shook a little. "I need your help." "Mark? What's going on? You don't sound well." Miller asked with concern. I took a deep breath and told Miller about all my recent misgivings and discoveries. When I finished, there was silence on the other end of the line for a moment. "Mark, I'm sorry you're in this situation," Miller concluded. "If you really suspect Kate is having an affair, I suggest you hire a private investigator. I know a guy named Frank who used to be a cop and now works as a private investigator. His methods may be a little unconventional, but they work well. Want me to contact him?" I hesitated, but agreed. "Well, please, Miller." The next day, I met Frank at a cafe. He looked younger than I expected, dressed in a proper suit, nothing like the image I had in my head of a scruffy private detective. "Mr. Mark," Frank held out his hand. "Miller filled me in on your situation. I need you to tell me any information that might be useful, such as your wife's schedule, places she frequents, and who you suspect." I told Frank all the information I knew, including where Kate worked, the hours she claimed to have worked overtime, and my suspicions about Jason. Frank took careful note of the information and then looked up at me. "Mr. Mark, I must warn you that the truth can be painful. Are you sure you want to continue?" I looked him in the eye and nodded firmly. "I need to know the truth, no matter how overwhelming it is." Frank smiled slightly. "Okay, let's get started then. I'll get back to you as soon as I can." For the next few days, I forced myself to keep a normal pace of life. I went to work as usual, took care of my daughter Emilia, and even tried to act like my usual self towards Kate. But inside, anxiety and restlessness came in waves like a tidal wave. I had to resist the urge to question Kate whenever I saw her smiling at her cell phone or coming home late at night. I told myself to trust Frank and give him time to investigate. A week later, on Friday night, I got a text from Frank asking me to meet him at the park early the next morning. I barely closed my eyes that night. The next morning, I was up before dawn. I went downstairs gingerly and left Emilia a note saying I was out for a run. Then I drove to the promised park. Frank was already waiting for me on the bench. His expression was serious, and he held an envelope in his hand. "Mr. Mark," he spoke, his voice low, "the results of my investigation are here. I must warn you again that the contents may make you uncomfortable." I took a deep breath and took the envelope. When I opened it and saw the photos and documents inside, I felt like the whole world was spinning. The photos clearly document Kate and Jason's various intimate behaviors. There are pictures of them on restaurant dates, walking down the street hand in hand, and even pictures of them going in and out of hotels. What breaks my heart even more is that some of these photos also feature my daughter Emilia. I shuddered as I flipped through the papers. There were records of Kate and Jason's text messages, records of their phone conversations, and even printouts of some email exchanges. All of this evidence points to one undeniable fact. My wife, Kate, was having a passionate affair with her boss, Jason. "I'm sorry, Mr. Mark," Frank said softly, handing me a bottle of water. I mechanically took the water bottle, but didn't drink it. It was as if my brain had stopped functioning and only one thought was repeating over and over again. How did this happen? Is this the end of our 11 years of marriage? "There's one more thing you need to know," Frank hesitated, but continued. "Based on some conversations I intercepted, it appears they're planning a divorce. Kate is planning to take your daughter." The words hit me like a punch in the chest. I looked up and into Frank's eyes. "What do I do?" Frank sighed. "Right now, you need to protect yourself and your daughter. I suggest you contact your attorney immediately and start preparing for the divorce proceedings. Remember, in situations like this, being preemptive often gives you an advantage." I nodded and stood up. Though still confused and in pain inside, I knew I had to take action. For myself, and even more so for my daughter Emilia. "Thank you, Frank," I said, my voice firmer than I expected. "I think I need to call Miller." As I walked out of the park, I looked back at the bench. It was there that my life changed forever. But I know that I must be brave in whatever awaits me ahead. Because now, I'm fighting not only for myself, but for my future with Emilia. I'm sitting in Miller's office, the envelope Frank gave me clutched in my hand. Miller was scrutinizing the evidence inside, his expression becoming more and more serious as he went through it. "Mark," Miller finally spoke, "the evidence is really quite strong. Photographs, videos, audio recordings, and even records of email exchanges. From a legal standpoint, these are more than enough to prove Kate's infidelity." I nodded, feeling my throat tighten. Despite having seen the evidence, hearing Miller say that sent a wave of pain through me. "But the most worrisome thing is this." Miller pointed to a printout of an email conversation. "It looks like Kate and Jason are already planning a divorce. And," he paused as if weighing his words, "they're planning to fight for custody of Emilia." I jerked my head up. "What? What makes them think they can take Emilia from me?" Miller sighed. "Unfortunately, in many cases, the courts tend to award child custody to the mother. But don't worry, we have enough evidence of Kate's misbehavior. Add to that the fact that you've been a dedicated father, and we have a good chance of getting custody of Emilia." I took a deep breath and tried to calm down. "So what do we do now?" Miller took out a notebook and began to lay out a plan. "First, we need to be preemptive. We need to have all the paperwork ready before Kate officially files for divorce. Second, we need to gather more information about Jason. If he has any bad records or suspicious behavior, it could work in our favor." I nodded, suddenly remembering something. "By the way, Frank mentioned that Jason may have had some shady business in college. Maybe we can start with that?" Miller brightened. "Good idea. I'll have Frank continue to look into Jason's background. If we can find any evidence against him, It will help us in the fight for Emilia's custody. Over the next few hours, we discussed divorce strategies at length, and Miller advised us to take a hardline approach, ask for full custody, and fight for as much property division as possible. Remember, Mark, Miller said gravely, from now on, you're going to have to be extra careful what you say and do. Don't give Kate any leverage you can use. At the same time, record as much of your time with Emilia as possible. All of this could be favorable evidence in court. I nodded, feeling both exhausted and determined. It was dark when I left Miller's office. As I drove home, my mind kept replaying everything I learned today. Not only did my wife betray me, but she was going to take my daughter. The realization sent a cold wave of anger through me. However, all the negativity temporarily dissipated when I opened the door to my home and saw Emilia running happily over to hug me. I hugged her tightly and swore in my heart that I would protect my little girl no matter what. Over the next few weeks, I began to act on Miller's advice. I became more involved in Emilia's daily life, doing homework with her, taking her to extracurricular activities, and creating and documenting as much of our time together as possible. At the same time, I was careful to keep my interactions with Kate normal and not let her notice anything out of the ordinary. Frank hasn't been idle either. He was quick to bring new information about Jason. "Mr. Mark," Frank said during another of our secret meetings, "I found out some interesting information about Jason's college days. It seems our Mr. Perfect isn't as polished as he appears." He handed me a report. According to the report, Jason was once investigated for alleged sexual harassment at a fraternity party while in college. Although no charges were ultimately filed due to lack of evidence, the stain remains in the school's records. "This is good news for us," Miller said after reading the report. "It doesn't directly prove that Jason is still engaging in similar behavior now, but it at least makes the judge suspicious of Jason's character. It could be a pivotal point in the fight for custody of Emilia." As the investigation progressed, we had more and more information. We find out that Jason is not only developing a relationship with Kate, but he's also abusing his position at the company and using his position for personal gain. Not only could this information be used against Jason, but it could also affect Kate's position in the company. However, despite all the evidence we have in our favor, Miller advised me not to do anything rash for a while. "Now is not the best time for a showdown," he explained. "We need to wait for the right opportunity. If done correctly, we can maximize your and Emilia's protection while hitting Jason and Kate in one fell swoop." I understand Miller's intentions, but it's torture for me to live under the same roof as Kate every day, pretending as if nothing is wrong. I had to hold back the anger and pain I felt inside and continue to play the role of a husband who had no knowledge of his wife's betrayal. Sometimes, when I see Kate giggling into her cell phone or excusing herself from working late, I can barely control the urge to question her. But every time I remember Miller's warning, I take a deep breath and force myself to stay calm. My only solace is the time I spend with Emilia. I began to get more involved in her life, helping her with her homework, playing games with her, and listening to her tell interesting stories about what was happening at school. Looking at her innocent smile made me even more determined to get the best future for her. At the same time, I began to prepare for the new life that might come. I quietly organized our finances and made sure all important documents were backed up. I even started thinking about where we might move to live if we got custody of Emilia. This two-sided life lasted almost 2 months. Each day is like walking on a tightrope, being careful not to let Kate notice anything unusual, but also being prepared for the upcoming legal battle. Finally, on a Friday afternoon, Miller called me and said the time was right. "Mark," his voice came through the phone, "we have all the necessary paperwork ready. Now it's time to take action." I took a deep breath and felt a rush of tension and relief. "Okay, so what do I do next?" "Drop Emilia off at a relative's house over the weekend," Miller suggested, "and then talk to Kate on Monday night. Show her the divorce papers we've prepared. Remember, stay calm and don't lose control. If she refuses to sign, don't force it. We just want to give her a clear signal that we have everything under control." I nodded, even though I knew Miller couldn't see it. "Understood. What about Jason and their side of the company?" "Don't worry," Miller said with a hint of a smile in his voice. "I've already set it up. The day after you talk to Kate, We'll launch legal action against Jason and their company at the same time. Trust me, they'll be caught off guard." After hanging up, I stood at the window and looked out at the traffic. I knew that from this moment on, my life would change forever. But whatever awaits me ahead, I'm ready for it. For my own sake, for Emilia's, it's time to end this farce. On Friday night, I offered to take Emilia to her favorite pizza place under the pretext of celebrating. As I watched my daughter gleefully chow down, I had mixed feelings. I realized that this may be our last dinner as a complete family. After dinner, I dropped Emilia off at my sister's house. "Daddy, why do I have to spend the night at my aunt's house?" Emilia asked suspiciously. I knelt down and looked her flat in the eye. "Honey, Mommy and Daddy have some important things to talk about. Think of it as a slumber party with your cousins." I tried to keep my voice steady. "Okay." Emilia nodded before giving me a big hug. "Love you, Daddy." "I love you too, baby." I hugged her tightly, trying to keep my inner emotions in check. When I got home, I started preparing for the upcoming conversation. I checked the paperwork Miller had given me to make sure everything was in order. Then I sat in the living room and waited for Kate to come home. About 9 p.m., I heard the sound of a key being inserted into a lock hole. Kate walked in and seemed a little surprised to see me sitting there. "Mark, why are you still up?" she asked, taking off her jacket as she did so. "Kate, we need to talk," I said calmly. She stopped moving and turned to look at me with a hint of caution on her face. "Did something happen?" I gestured for her to sit down and then took a deep breath. "Kate, I know everything. About you and Jason." Her face instantly turned pale and her lips trembled slightly. "You? What are you talking about?" I didn't answer. I just pushed the envelope with the evidence in it in front of her. Kate opened the envelope with a shaking hand, and the blood completely faded from her face when she saw the photos and papers inside. I can explain," she stammered. "There's no need to explain," I interrupted her. "The facts are clear. You betrayed me. You betrayed our marriage, and you're going to take Emilia." Kate sat paralyzed on the couch as tears began to pool in her eyes. "Mark, I never meant to hurt you." "But you did it anyway," I said calmly. "Now we need to discuss what to do next." I pulled out the divorce papers Miller had prepared for us and began to explain them line by line. I'll list the details of property division, custody arrangements, alimony, and so on. Kate jerked her head up when I mentioned asking for full custody. "No, you can't take Emilia," she said excitedly. "She needs her mother." "Just take her like you and Jason planned?" I asked rhetorically. "Kate, I have enough evidence. Considering your infidelity and Jason's somewhat dishonorable past, I'm pretty sure I'll get full custody." A flicker of panic flashed across Kate's face. "What? What dishonorable past?" Instead of answering her question head-on, I simply continued, "If you agree to this agreement, I can consider granting you more visitation rights. Otherwise, we'll just have to meet in court." Kate was silent for a long time, tears streaming silently down her cheeks. Finally, she looked up and said in a shaky voice, I need time to think about it. Can you give me a few days?" I nodded. "You have 3 days. Give me an answer by Thursday. In the meantime, I suggest you move to the guest room. For Emilia's sake, it's best if we stay calm and sane." Kate nodded mechanically, then slowly stood up. Just as she was about to leave the living room, she suddenly turned and asked, "Mark, do you still love me?" I looked into her eyes and felt a pang of heartache. Even though she betrayed me, more than a decade of affection can't be so easily erased. "I used to love you dearly, Kate, but now, I'm not so sure anymore." She lowered her head and whispered, "I'm sorry," before walking quickly up the stairs. The next few days were unusually tense at home. We avoided meeting as much as possible, and even when we had to act as if nothing was wrong in front of Emilia, we rarely talked. Emilia seemed to sense something, but we both tried to keep a facade of calm. Thursday morning, I was getting ready to go to work when Kate stopped me. "Mark, I've given it some thought," she said, exhaustion in her voice. "I agree to the divorce, but I can't accept losing custody of Emilia. Can we talk about this some more?" I looked at her haggard face with mixed feelings. "Kate, I understand how you feel. But given the current situation, I think it's best for Emilia to be raised primarily by me. Of course, you can still see her often. Tears welled up in Kate's eyes again. Please, Mark, I know I did wrong, but please don't punish me with Emilia. She needs her mother. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. This isn't a punishment, Kate. It's in Emilia's best interest. Do you really think she's going to get the best care in your new family with Jason? Kate visibly cringed at the mention of Jason's name. I'm not sure Jason and I will ever be together again. The answer surprised me. What do you mean? Kate lowered her head. I've been thinking about it ever since you told me you knew everything. I realized that I made a big mistake. Jason, he's not who I thought he was. I don't know how to respond. On the one hand, I'm relieved that Kate is finally seeing the light. On the other hand, I'm worried that this might just be a tactic she's using to gain more leverage in the divorce settlement. Kate, I finally said, whatever the situation is between you and Jason right now, it doesn't change what has already happened. Our marriage is beyond repair. As for custody of Emilia, we can discuss that further, but my position won't change much. Kate nodded, seeming to understand my resolve. I understand. So, what should we do next? I'll have my attorney contact you, I said, and he'll set up a formal meeting where we can discuss all the terms in detail. Until then, I suggest you get a lawyer to represent your interests as well. Just then, my cell phone rang. It's Miller calling. Mark, Miller's voice came through the phone. We just filed the lawsuit against Jason and their company. How's it going on your end? I glanced at Kate, then stepped aside and replied in a whisper. Kate basically agrees to the divorce, but still disputes the custody issue. We're discussing the details. Okay, Miller said. Remember, don't make any promises. Have her attorney contact me directly. By the way, you'd better warn Kate about the lawsuit against Jason and the company. She'll probably get a notice from the company soon. After hanging up, I turned to Kate. Kate, I need to tell you something. My attorney just filed a lawsuit against Jason and your company. Kate looked at me in shock. What? Why? Because they condone your misbehavior, I said calmly. You will probably receive a notice from the company soon. I suggest you get a lawyer as soon as possible. Kate looks completely devastated by the news. She dropped to the couch and covered her face with her hands. God, Mark, why did you do that? Because everyone needs to be held accountable for their actions, I said, with a hint of bitterness in my voice, including you, Jason, and the companies that condone this behavior. I had mixed feelings watching Kate break down. Part of me feels relief at finally taking action, and the other part of me feels sadness at what I'm about to lose. But I know that this is just the beginning of a long journey. We have more challenges and difficulties to face next. I looked at my watch and realized I was going to be late if I didn't get going. I have to go to work, I said. I'll pick Emilia up after school. You take care of yourself? Kate looked up with mixed emotions in her eyes. Mark. She wanted to say something. I stopped and waited for her to follow. But in the end, she just whispered, I'm sorry for everything. I nodded without saying anything and turned to walk out of the house. Sitting in the car, I took a deep breath and tried to calm my inner turmoil. I knew that from this moment on, our lives would change forever. But no matter what awaits us ahead, I'm going to face it strong for Emilia and for our future. The day after our showdown, things started to move quickly. As Miller predicted, Jason completely lost it when he received notice of the lawsuit. I was working in my office that afternoon when I got a hysterical phone call from Kate. Mark, she screamed, Jason's crazy. He broke into our house. I immediately stood up. What? Where's Emilia? Is she okay? Emilia's still at school, Kate said sharply. But Jason, he's throwing red paint everywhere and trying to set a fire. My heart almost stopped. Kate, get out of there and call the police right now. I'm going back. I drove home at speed, my heart beating wildly the whole way. When I arrived, I was shocked by what I saw. Our front yard was a mess, with red paint splattered across the exterior walls and windows of the house in lurid, blood-stain-like patterns. I had just gotten out of the car when I saw Jason rushing out of the house with something in his hand. In that moment, I realized it could have been a weapon. Out of instinct, I quickly pulled my pistol out of the car. "Jason, stop!" I yelled. But instead of stopping, he charged at me, and I saw the glint of metal in his hands. In that nick of time, I fired. Gunshots echoed through the quiet streets. Jason stumbled, then fell to the ground. I rushed forward and kicked the item that had fallen from his hand. It was a large kitchen knife. Kate ran out of nowhere and let out a heartbreaking scream at the sight. "Oh God, Jason!" She fell to her knees beside Jason and turned to me, fear and accusation in her eyes. "Mark, you killed him." I stood there, still holding the smoking gun in my hand, not knowing how to react for a moment. Sirens were heard in the distance and neighbors began to come out of their homes, looking curiously. The next few hours were a nightmare. The police arrived and I was taken away for questioning. I explained what happened over and over again, emphasizing that it was self-defense. Ultimately, after reviewing the evidence at the scene and the testimony of my neighbors, the police determined that my actions were self-defense. But that conclusion didn't make me feel any easier. Jason isn't dead, but he's seriously injured. He was taken to the hospital for emergency surgery. And Kate, she's completely devastated. That night, I sat on a bench at the police station waiting for the final paperwork to be completed. Emilia's been picked up by my sister and doesn't know what's going on yet. I felt exhausted and filled with mixed emotions. Miller rushed to the police station. He tapped me on the shoulder. "Mark, are you okay?" I shook my head. "I don't know, Miller. I never thought things would turn out this way." Miller sighed. "No one could have predicted this. But you have to remember that you were protecting yourself. You're not doing anything wrong." I nodded, but my heart was still heavy. "What about Kate? Is she okay?" "She's in the hospital," Miller said, "and she's insisting on staying with Jason." "Mark, I have to tell you, this whole thing could have an impact on our divorce case." I looked up. "What do you mean?" "Kate may claim full custody of Emilia, citing your violent tendencies." Miller explains, "We need to be prepared for that scenario." I felt a wave of panic, but it was self-defense. The police have already decided that. "I know," Miller reassured, "but the courts may see it differently. But don't worry, we have ample evidence that you're a good father. We'll fight it." The next few days threw my life into chaos. The news media began to pay attention to the incident, and there was always a reporter squatting in front of our house. I've had to take time off work to stay home and try to protect Emilia from all of this. Kate moved out of the house and into a hotel. She refused to talk to me and only contacted me through her attorney. As Miller expected, her attorney filed for full custody, claiming that my violent behavior made me unfit to raise the children. The court hearings lasted several weeks. My team of attorneys did everything they could to defend me, presenting overwhelming evidence that I was a responsible father and that Jason was the real threat. Ultimately, the judge ruled. Considering all the evidence, including Kate's infidelity and Jason's propensity for violence, the judge awarded me primary custody of Emilia and Kate was granted visitation. When the judge announced the verdict, I felt a sense of relief. But seeing the look on Kate's face gave me another pang of heartache. Whatever happened, she was Emilia's mother after all. After leaving the courtroom, Kate stopped me. She looked haggard, her eyes red and swollen. "Mark," she said softly, I'm so sorry for everything. I know I hurt you, and I hurt Emilia. I don't expect you to forgive me, but please let me stay Emilia's mom." I looked at her and felt a rush of mixed emotions come over me. "Kate, you will always be Emilia's mom. I won't stop you from seeing each other, but you need to prove that you are worthy of Emilia's trust." She nodded, tears welling up in her eyes. "I will, Mark. I promise." However, things didn't go the way we expected. Over the next few months, Kate's condition worsened. She began to drink heavily and missed many visits with Emilia. Every time I see her, she looks more haggard and lost. Kate was last seen 6 months after the divorce became official. She came to pick up Emilia, but was obviously drunk. I had to refuse to let Emilia go with her. "I'm sorry, Kate," I said. "You're not in a fit state to care for Emilia." She looked at me with pain and despair in her eyes. "You were right, Mark. I screwed up everything. Maybe Emilia's better off without me." I tried to say something to comfort her, but she turned away. That was the last time I saw her. After that, Kate disappeared. She didn't show up for her scheduled visitation, her phone didn't work, her apartment was empty. I tried to contact her friends and family, but no one knows where she went. It's a tough time for Emilia. She doesn't understand why her mom suddenly disappeared and often cries and asks me if she doesn't love her anymore. All I could do was hold her tight and tell her that mommy loves her. It's just that mommy is sick right now and needs time to heal. We are slowly getting our lives on track. I sold my old house and moved to a new neighborhood with Emilia. We all started counseling to learn how to cope with the emotional trauma of this drastic change. Emilia is a tough kid. While she still gets sad because she misses her mom, she's also trying to adjust to her new life. I did everything I could to be a good father to her and be there for every important moment. 3 years later, I met Jo at a parent-teacher conference. She is a single mother of a daughter the same age as Emilia. We started dating, and slowly a new relationship sprouted between us. Jo understands my past and respects Emilia's thoughts about her mother. She waited patiently until we were all ready to accept her into our lives. 5 years later, Jo and I were married. Emilia stood beside me as my maid of honor. I felt a surge of relief as I looked at her bright smile. Despite all the storms, we are finally making a new start. Life goes on, but shadows of the past occasionally surface. Whenever Emilia reaches a major milestone in her life, graduating high school, enrolling in college, I think of Kate. I even hired Frank to look for her again, but to no avail each time. Sometimes I imagine what would have happened if things hadn't gone that far. If our marriage hadn't fallen apart, if Jason hadn't shown up, but I'd soon stop assuming that. Life has given us a second chance, and I've decided to make it count. Now, standing at Emilia's college graduation and watching her confidently walk up to the podium, I couldn't be prouder. I know that we can be strong enough to face whatever awaits us in the future, because we've been through the toughest times and we survived. This is our story, a story of betrayal, of pain, but also of hope and rebirth. It taught me that life sometimes throws us off course, but there is always the possibility of finding happiness again if we just keep going. Thank you for taking the time to listen to today's story. If you enjoyed it, please like and subscribe if you haven't already. If you have a story to share about your own or someone else's experience, please feel free to contact me. Take care.